biggest ways motorcycle culture is changing is in rider demographics. This is kind of a multifaceted topic, but the short version is riders are getting older. This might be hard to believe if you look at all the young riders on social media or in your specific riding group. But dig deep below the surface and in the dark nether regions of motorcycling where no TikToker or motovlogger would dare venture, the motorcycle world is teeming with boomers and aging Gen Xers. According to the data that I'm looking at here, the average age of a motorcyclist in the United States is 50 years old. 50! No wonder super sport sales are down. These geezers can't even bend over to tie the laces on their own shoes, let alone withstand the aggressive riding position on a sport bike. And you might think, well, the average age of a rider is 50. It must be getting younger as each generation ages out of riding more and young people are getting started, right? But for now, it's actually the opposite. The average rider age has been steadily increasing over the last 20 years. In the 80s, the average rider was in their mid-30s. In the 90s, they were in their 40s, and until now, they're in their 50s. A major reason for this is because a lot of people started riding back in the day when the cost of living was lower, bikes were cheaper, and there was more popular interest in motorcycling. These riders from the 80s and 90s have continued riding to this day, while younger generations are more apprehensive to get into the sport or have more obstacles preventing them from making the jump. But despite the average age of riders getting higher, diversity amongst riders has increased. More women than ever are riding motorcycles, thanks to marketing efforts, accessible bikes, social media influencers, and things of that ilk. More women are exposed to motorcycling in a way that it feels more inclusive to them, thus creating a stronger interest in riding. Recent studies show that as many as 20% of riders are female, compared to less than 10% 30 years ago. Motorcycling is also more popular amongst people of color, as there have been a multitude of industry and cultural pushes to grow the motorcycle customer base beyond just old white dudes. Meanwhile, conservative Harley riders are nuking their bikes because of DEI policies. But the culture of motorcycling is also changing as new generations of riders prioritize practicality and sensibility with their bikes and riding habits. Motorcycling has notoriously been a sport for enthusiasts, where riders want for the best, fastest, and most exciting motorcycle with less regard for the cost, practicality, or safety. For younger generations of riders, they are incredibly focused on getting a bike that's usable, economical, and provides good value for money. The cost of living continues to rise in the US, so younger generations are far more cost conscious with prospective purchases. This has a motivating factor on different types of potential new riders. Maybe a more cost conscious rider wants to buy a motorcycle for inexpensive, fuel-efficient transportation in an urban environment. Or they are an enthusiast themselves, but they put in a lot of time and energy to make sure they're getting the most practical and value-driven bike they can get for the money. This practicality angle is responsible for much of the interest in middleweight adventure bikes or the comfortable, not-so-super sport bikes. If they're gonna spend money on a bike, they wanna actually be able to use it and enjoy it in a variety of different conditions. We've definitely moved away from a culture where it wasn't uncommon to go finance a leader bike just to go put 100 miles on the odometer each month, going up to a bike meetup and doing a few highway pulls, and otherwise letting your motorcycle just sit in your garage unused for majority of the time. A majority of new riders from younger generations aren't just buying a motorcycle because they're fast and cool and they want to flex on their buddies. They want bikes that are practical for the type of riding they're going to do and provide a lot of value for where they're going to spend. Motorcyclists are also safer than they've ever been. This is a big change in our culture. This is more access to the information than ever before, and a new rider has the opportunity to swing a leg over a motorcycle, and they can deep dive on tons of motorcycle related topics. I'd like to think that what we're doing here on Yami Noob is helping. They know what gear to buy, what techniques to practice, and what some of the common obstacles new riders will have to overcome. You've got forums, YouTube videos, articles, really every type of informative content under the sun that can encourage new riders to make safe, smart decisions on their bikes. And yes, there's tons of crazy stuff on social media that bikers are doing, but for the most part, people are looking things up and finding good information, and they're able to sift through the crap. Younger generations are also more risk averse than they have been, in certain ways to a fault in my opinion, contributing to a greater sense of loneliness and isolation as they avoid partying and other reckless behaviors. Because how are you expected to bond with your friends if you're not engaging in behavior that poses a risk to your safety? But that's a topic for a whole other conversation. My point being, young people today, they just don't take as many risks, and riding a motorcycle is very risky. So new people start riding, they're far more likely to pursue the safest avenue possible. They prioritize small displacement beginner bikes, embrace all the necessary riding gear. The gear that is available is accessible and safe as it's ever been, and bikes themselves are safer than ever with all the latest and greatest safety features. If you were starting motorcycling in the early 90s, you'd throw on a half helmet, some work boots, and ride an air-cooled cruiser with drum brakes. It's just such a stark contrast to today's riding culture, where it has become almost uncommon to cite a motorcyclist riding without being kitted out in proper riding gear, Harley riders and Gixxer squids notwithstanding. You also look at the breadth, variety, depth, and width of all these beginner bikes out there today, and there's just so many options for people to get started, and that's the market responding to the demand. Following that same thread, the entire identity surrounding motorcyclists has changed. Let me explain. Motorcycling used to go hand in hand with rebellion and a sort of outlaw persona. Whether you are a Harley pirate or a sport bike squid, you kind of carried the bad boy stigma. This really couldn't be more of a night and day difference when compared to the modern motorcyclist. Most Harley guys are average middle-aged suburban dudes, and most other motorcyclists are just normal people with varied interests and backgrounds. The early adoption of motorcycle culture in America stems back to post-World War II, when vets had returned home from wanting that sense of adventure and camaraderie they felt while serving. So they rode Harley Davidsons, the brand they were familiar with due to being used in the military during the war, and they started motorcycle riding clubs. While these early motorcycle riding clubs were just a bunch of dudes being dudes, over time certain clubs developed reputations for violence and criminality.
Hell's Angels, accused of rape and perversion, theft, narcotics, and violence.
Even motorcyclists with no affiliation with any sort of MC sort of adopted that bad boy tough guy persona. And over time, the affinity for that sort of lifestyle waned, and manufacturers, specifically Honda, made a point to market their motorcycles to average everyday people and not just quote-unquote bikers. Now, fast forward many decades later, and despite the popularity of shows like Sons of Anarchy, most people who ride motorcycles lead pretty typical lives otherwise. The Yami Noob Discord server is a very insightful microcosm of the motorcycling community as a whole. I actually love looking in there and just seeing the types of people that are in, because we have a super diverse community of men, women, Americans, Europeans, cruiser boys, sport bike guys, track rats, adventure guys, you name it. And while we have people from all different backgrounds who are all interested in all sorts of riding, everyone is pretty darn normal. They have jobs, families, no criminal enterprises or violent proclivities, except for that one guy that ran from the cops on his KTM. That was pretty crazy, but he's an outlier. They like video games and anime and tech and cars and memes, lots of memes. If you go to any bike meetup, it's just normal people who like motorcycles. It isn't a bunch of outlaw criminals or wannabe criminals in leather vests and half helmets talking about what territory they need to infiltrate next.
Guys, time is running out to win this Aprilia RS457 on YamiNoob.co. You guys know I give away bikes here on the channel. I've done over 50 motorcycles valued at over $500,000, and this one is the next one on the docket. Head over to the site and become a member for your best chance to win. You're gonna stack up your entries, get access to the Discord server, and everything else in between. You can also spend on the store. Every dollar you spend will get you an entry to win this machine. We got hats, hoodies, t-shirts, riding keychains, all kinds of great stuff. So go and check that out in the link in the description below, and don't miss your chance, because this is a super short sweepstakes.
If we're talking about how motorcycle culture has changed, we cannot leave out ADV culture. Harley-Davidson used to lend itself towards the biggest cosplaying subculture, but as that outlaw culture has kind of fell by the wayside, it seems more and more riders are gravitating towards the rugged ADV cosplay aesthetic. ADV bikes are some of the most popular bikes on the market right now, with each manufacturer selling multiple adventure models across varying displacements. You've got the KTM 390 Adventure, the Himalayan 450, the V-Strom 800, the Transalp 750, the Tenere 700, the Tuareg 660, the 890 Adventure, the Norden 901, the Desert X, the 1290 Adventure, the Pan America, and of course, the BMW GS. And that is literally just scratching the surface. And with the popularity of growing adventure bikes, there is a huge selection of adventure bike farkles, rally lights, handguards, skid plates, tubeless conversions, panniers, windscreens, center stands. The list goes on and on for what's possible aftermarket upgrades ADV guys can do to their bikes. And there are, of course, ADV gear brands like Climb that carry the sort of elite pedigree of state-of-the-art adventure motorcycle gear. Adventure bikes and all their other adjacent adventure bike paraphernalia are truly omnipresent in motorcycling right now, and we just can't seem to escape it. I mean, your own Papa Yam might have ever fallen for the ADV bike siren song, but you're gonna have to stay tuned for a future video to find out what I mean by that. I think motorcycling culture has changed a lot too in regards to ADVs, because if you look back in the past, adventure motorcycling was definitely a niche amongst all motorcycling and really only broke out in the mold in the early 2000s with Ian McGregor and Charlie Borman's Long Way Round. It seemed like after that, more and more people wanted to hit the road on an adventure touring motorcycle rather than a Harley Davidson. And the culture of motorcycling has definitely changed through the influence of digital content and online communities. It's allowed more riders to connect, share experiences, advice, and insight, and generally foster the community of motorcycling. Social media platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok have made motorcycling more accessible to a diverse audience. People who may have never considered riding are exposed to a variety of content, including how-tos, motovlogs, bike reviews, and comparisons, and more, giving motorcycling a broader reach and enticing new people to want to pursue riding for themselves. I've seen firsthand through this channel, and I've heard from so many people over the years about how they started watching Yami Noob before they started riding and utilized a lot of the information and content to inform the decisions and provide them with a sort of optimal path into riding. And I love hearing that once they got the bike, they got off of YouTube and they just started riding, because that to me is the point. But of course, this isn't just limited to Yami Noob. There's tons of great content out there with tons of creators making all kinds of stuff with the same intention to get more people on two wheels. And once people are riding, it is a privilege to be able to connect with other riders through social platforms. Not everyone is lucky enough to have friends in their local area to ride or talk about bikes with, so being able to engage in those communities online does a lot of good for the industry as a whole. It builds community and gets people excited about riding. Of course, there is the dark side of motorcycle content too, where the influx of paid product promotion contributes to a consumer culture where viewers are as much encouraged to buy products as they are to watch and enjoy content for the sake of education and entertainment. And look, I get it. Producing videos on YouTube isn't free, and it is nearly impossible to sustain a channel based solely on YouTube's ad revenue alone. But the massive influx of paid product reviews and promotional content put out by the motorcycle content creators necessitates viewers to be more discerning of what they're consuming online and recognize that there's often an angle where an influencer is endlessly singing the praises of a certain bike or motorcycle product. And the last point we need to talk about today is the way motorcycles themselves are changing. Four cylinders are in massive decline in favor of versatile, practical, cheap to produce twins. Beginner bikes are creeping up a displacement for no reason other than to create perceived value or to continuously meet emissions restrictions. Bikes are becoming bloated with features that a majority of riders have no real use for, especially on small displacement bikes that are outfitted with ride modes, launch control, keyless ignition, or smartphone connectivity. By most standards, motorcycles are the best that they've ever been. But there's definitely a sense that a lot of these implementations and advancements are unnecessary and excessive. You know, does a middleweight ADV bike need a quick shifter when the quick shifter only works well at high RPM and at wide open throttle, when that isn't really how the bike wants to be ridden or the engine isn't necessarily the happiest? A lot of progress is being made on automatic transmissions or electric clutch systems. Honda has the DCT and the new E-clutch. BMW and Yamaha are working on automatic bikes as well. And there is of course the advancement of electric motorcycles and hybrid motorcycles that are new to the culture of motorcycling, but I won't harp on that too much because it gets people a little bit too riled up. And then as new riders are in search of value, Chinese-based companies like CF Moto or Moto Marini are becoming more prevalent. A lot of manufacturers are expanding or have expanded their global production as well as through varying partnerships. CF Moto makes engines for KTM, Bajaj makes bikes for KTM and Triumph, Harley-Davidson makes their Rev Max bikes in Thailand now and has a weird small displacement bikes that are made in China. The motorcycle industry as a whole is really complex in the current landscape, with global manufacturing, distribution, and multiple factors that seem to be pulling manufacturers in a bunch of different directions. And I think we're in a very strange inflection point when it comes to motorcycling. Who knows what it's going to look like in the next 15 or 20 years? That brings us to the end of today's video. As a whole, motorcycling is probably the best it's ever been. Seriously, it's a great time to be a motorcycle rider. There's tons of great bikes, easy access to great information, and a broader appeal to riding, and everything's safer than it's ever been. But motorcycle culture is really changing, and every time I realize it's been a week since I've seen a jigshaw rider in cargo shorts and flip-flops, I can't help but think, have we lost our way? Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you like what we're doing here. We've got daily motorcycle content, a weekly live stream, a free newsletter, and a fresh crop of giveaway bikes in the pipeline that you can have a chance of winning. Become a part of the Yami Noob universe at yaminoob.co. You won't regret it. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end. I will catch you guys later. Fact: mirrors facing each other don't produce infinite reflections. Each reflection will be darker than the last and eventually fade into invisibility. Goodbye.
Well, you made it to the end of the video. And this RS457, what's that? It wants me to tell you to keep watching Yami Noob. Click that video right over here and keep gathering all the motorcycle knowledge that you need to become the best rider you can possibly be. But it also wants me to tell you to go to yaminoob.co and get signed up to win this amazing motorcycle. So do that and keep watching the show.